Welcome to this web lecture on transport modes. If we want to transport a good from A to B, we of course need means of doing so. So, for example, we need a truck or we need a train where we can load the goods, because otherwise we can't transport them. Most of the time we just cannot carry them. There's of course a few more transport modes. So a few that come to mind is waterway transport, air transport, and in particular within cities, it becomes more and more common to transport with bikes. If we look at what the best of these transport modes is, so which one we should choose, we can of course look into transport costs. We can look into transport time. So how much does it cost me to transport something from here to here versus how long does it take me? So usually, for example, if we look in the transport mode air, that is most of the time relatively expensive, but it's also relatively fast. So we have a trade-off here. There's of course a few more ways of distinguishing which transport mode is the best. So one thing that comes to mind is volume. So in particular, if I want to transport large amounts of goods, then of course it's good if I have a container vessel where I have sufficient space. This of course also indirectly affects the costs then. Secondly, of course, resilience is important. So if the fact that the Evergreen is stuck in the Suez Canal is blocking all transport, that is definitely not a resilient option. And one more way that we can distinguish different transport modes is sustainability. So how much do I emit in CO2, in NOx, in any sort of emissions that we can consider by transporting a good? And which of these transport modes is then the best, of course, also depends on what my objective is. So what I personally would like to do. If we look into energy efficiency as our first metric, then we see that there's a clear trade-off between the energy and the speed. And we also see that this trade-off is non-linear. So if we, on this not even linear but logarithmic scale, increase the energy costs, then we also increase the speed, but we don't increase the speed to the same extent. In particular, many of the transport modes that we see on a regular basis, so train, bus, car, trucks, etc., all of them are not really energy efficient and don't result in a very high speed. And usually, with respect to energy efficiency, most transportation modes lean to the very inefficient side. Then, of course, we have time, distance, and availability as different metrics. And if we compare our transport modes on them, then, for example, we see that rail takes weeks for intercontinental transport, but it is possible. So I can transport something from Asia to Europe using rail as a transport mode, but of course it takes me quite long. In a European level, we still take days, which partially has to do with the distance, partially has to do with the handling time, and for the most part, it's infeasible on a local scale. It is very similar for waterway transport, which usually also takes weeks for intercontinental transport, days in a European level, and is usually also infeasible on a local level. If we look into air transport, that is super fast. We can do this in less than a day on an intercontinental level. And the same also in a European level, but it's usually infeasible locally. So usually we can't fly something within Eindhoven. If we look at bikes, that of course only takes minutes within cities. We have these new delivery schemes, be it for food, be it for groceries, where they actually promise you that they're going to deliver your groceries within 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And this remains feasible if we're within cities. In the countryside, it might take a little bit longer because the distances are a little bit longer, but it is still feasible as long as the distances are sufficiently short. Of course, we cannot transport on a bike in a European or an intercontinental level just because the distances get too big. And the last mode, truck, is infeasible intercontinentally. So, of course, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, that is something that works on an inner European level. or within cities. But within cities, it takes considerably longer than transporting by bike, which partially has to do with the handling costs or with the handling time, but partially also has to do with the inaccessibility of cities for trucks, which is just increasing over time. Of course, exceptions prove the rule. Within cities, we're now seeing attempts to also use other transport modes. So if we're looking at air transport, drones are becoming, not frequently, but every once in a while, used to transport goods within a city. The same holds for tram, so an inner city railway system. So we see a lot of pilot projects across Europe, but also beyond, where companies and municipalities try to bring freight onto the rail. One example for that is the cargo tram in Dresden that you see on this picture. And in this cargo tram project, Volkswagen attempted to transship goods within the city between different factories using the regular tram network. And DHL, as well as a few of their competitors, are now doing deliveries also on a waterway. So this, of course, works in particular in cities with many, many waterways. And in some of these places, it's now actually faster to deliver by boat than to deliver by cargo bike or by truck. The solution is usually not using one transport mode, but combining all transport modes. And this is what we're going to look into throughout the consecutive videos. What I would like you to take away from this short web lecture on transport modes is, first of all, which transport modes there are, and secondly, how to combine those modes. I would, of course, also like you to keep in mind what different trade-offs there are between these transport modes. Thanks.